The night Colette Arsenault walked into the Hargrove Foundation Gala alone, the room didn't go quiet. It did something worse. It kept going. The laughter, the clinking glasses, the careful drift of conversation from cluster to cluster, and simply arranged itself around her as though she weren't there at all. That was the thing nobody talked about afterward. Not the silence, but the continuation. Owen Hargrove noticed it from across the room. He had been standing near the east-facing windows for most of the evening, holding a glass of sparkling water he hadn't touched, watching the city lights spread out below like a second sky. He had a gift for watching things, not with judgment, but with the particular attention of someone who had learned early that the most important information in any room was never what people said out loud. He saw Colette come in through the main doors at 7:42. She was wearing a dark green dress that looked carefully chosen and slightly out of step with the room's prevailing silvers and blacks. She paused at the entrance the way people do when they're reminding themselves of something, straightening without straightening. A kind of interior adjustment, and then she moved forward. She knew people here. That much was obvious. She offered small nods as she passed, and a few people returned them, briefly, before redirecting their attention elsewhere. One woman, blonde in a silver wrap dress, standing near the bar, made eye contact with Colette, held it for one beat too long, and then turned fully away to resume a conversation she had never actually paused. Owen had seen a lot of things in his 61 years. He had seen rooms like this one in Calgary, in Vancouver, in Toronto, and once in a hotel ballroom in Halifax that smelled like carpet cleaner and old ambition. He had learned that rooms like this one ran on an invisible current, a shared understanding of who mattered and who was to be managed, and that the current shifted whenever the people who controlled it decided it should. He did not yet know what had shifted Colette Arsenault out of alignment, but he could see clearly that something had. The Hargrove Foundation Gala was an annual event, ostensibly a charity fundraiser for early literacy programs across Alberta, practically a social accounting of who had risen and who had not in the preceding 12 months. Owen attended every year because his late wife Eleanor had sat on the foundation's board for 9 years before she died, and because he felt, in some quiet way he had never articulated to anyone, that showing up was a form of keeping faith with her. He was not the most obvious person in the room. He never had been. He was tall and solidly built, with gray at his temples and the kind of hands that looked more accustomed to field work than to fundraisers. He wore a suit well but not effortlessly, in the way of a man who had learned to dress for rooms that expected it without ever quite making peace with the expectation. Most people who didn't know him assumed, upon meeting him, that he was someone's accountant or perhaps a retired engineer. Something respectable and unremarkable. What they rarely guessed was that Owen Hargrove was the reason the gala had a name at all. His grandfather had founded the organization in 1952. Owen had quietly tripled its endowment over the past 2 decades, funded 3 new literacy centers in northern Alberta communities that no one in this particular ballroom would ever visit, and still sent handwritten thank you notes to every volunteer coordinator who donated their time. He did none of this loudly. He had never seen the point of doing things loudly. He watched Colette navigate to the edge of the room. She found a spot near one of the high tables, not at it, but beside it, in the particular placement of someone making themselves technically present while actually reducing the space they occupied. She had a glass of wine now. She was looking at the centerpiece. Owen looked at the centerpiece too. It was a tall arrangement of white lilies. He didn't know what she saw in it. He looked back at her. She was holding it together. That was the thing that struck him most. Not the isolation itself, but the precision with which she was managing it. The slight angle of her shoulders. The way her chin stayed level. She was performing composure for no audience, which meant the composure was real. He thought about Eleanor. He thought about the particular exhaustion of being strong in a room that has decided not to see you. He set down his glass of water and pushed away from the window. He didn't go straight toward her. That would have been too deliberate, and deliberateness in a room like this one had a way of being noticed and interpreted before it could be understood. He moved through the room the way he always moved, without urgency, nodding when nodded at, pausing when paused at, the kind of presence that registered as unhurried rather than purposeful. He stopped for a few minutes near a group that included his foundation's executive director. a sharp-eyed woman named Patricia Lindqvist, who had run the organization for 11 years and knew every seam in every room she walked into. She gave Owen a look that said she had already noticed what he was noticing. He gave her a look that said nothing in particular. That was enough, he continued on. Colette didn't see him approaching. She was looking at the dance floor now, where 3 or 4 couples had begun to move to a piece of music that was both inoffensive and entirely forgettable. There was something carefully neutral in her expression. Not sadness, exactly, but the near relative of sadness that settles in when a person stops expecting something to change. Owen stopped a few feet away. He didn't say anything for a moment. He looked at the dance floor, too. "The lilies are from a supplier in Lacombe," he said finally. "Eleanor, my wife, she used to visit the farm every summer. She said the smell of a lily field in July was the only truly honest thing she'd ever encountered." Colette turned to look at him. Her expression shifted slightly, not alarm, but the particular recalibration of a person who has been alone for long enough that an unexpected voice registers as a change in weather. "That's a specific thing to know," she said. She was specific about flowers. I retained what I could. He extended a hand. "Owen." She took it. "Colette, I know," he said. "You wrote the impact report on the Northern Centers 2 years ago. I read it 4 times. It was the best piece of work the Foundation has commissioned in a decade." She looked at him for a moment, reading him, he thought, checking the register of sincerity against the noise of an evening that had offered her very little of it. "Thank you," she said, and meant it. "You're here alone tonight," he said. It was not a question exactly. "I am. So am I." He glanced toward the dance floor. The music had shifted to something slightly less forgettable. "Would you want to walk over there? Not to dance, necessarily. Just to stand somewhere other than here." She almost smiled. He could see it, the edge of it, the decision about whether to let it through. "That might be the strangest invitation I've received this evening," she said. "Is that a yes?" "That's a yes," she said. They didn't dance right away. They stood at the edge of the floor for a few minutes, talking about the impact report, the methodology she had used, the communities she had visited, the particular difficulty of capturing in numbers something that was fundamentally about the texture of children's lives. Owen listened the way he listened to everything, which was to say completely, without the small surface movements of someone waiting for their turn to speak. He had noticed over the years that this unsettled some people. They interpreted attentiveness as judgment or stillness as disapproval. Colette didn't seem to have that problem. She spoke plainly and without performance, as though she had decided, somewhere between the door and the lily centerpiece, that performance was no longer worth the energy. "You've been with the Foundation for how long?" he asked. 4 years. Almost 5 before that. Research, federal government, then a brief and inadvisable detour through consulting. She paused. "I have a daughter. She's 8. I mention that because it explains a lot of the subsequent life decisions." "It does," he agreed. "Clarity of purpose. That's a generous way to put it. What would you call it?" She considered. "Reordering what matters. Deciding that certain things, positions, certain rooms, certain opinions of certain people were less important than I'd been told they were." He understood that. He understood it in the specific way of someone who had arrived at the same conclusion through a different road. Not through parenthood, but through grief. Through the year after Eleanor died, when the things that had seemed to matter flattened out into something he could see clearly for the first time. "That's usually not a popular decision," he said. "No," she agreed. "It tends to become obvious over time to the people whose opinion of you was contingent on your compliance." There it was. He had been wondering when it would surface, the actual shape of the thing that had arranged the room around her absence all evening. "Marcus Brenly," he said. Not a question. She looked at him. "He's on the event committee this year," Owen said. "I noticed he was steering the guest management. He has a history of doing that." He said it without emphasis. "Just information." Colette was quiet for a moment. The music changed again. Something slower, something with strings. "He was my director for 2 years, she said finally, "before I left the previous position. We disagreed about some things. I was more public about that disagreement than he would have preferred." She looked down at her glass. "He's well connected." "He is," Owen said, "within a certain radius." She looked up at him, reading the qualifier. "This Foundation's work extends somewhat beyond that radius," Owen said mildly. "As does mine." They danced twice over the course of the evening. The first time was the slow piece with strings, unremarkable as dancing went, but notable for the shift it produced in the room. Owen had learned over 61 years that sometimes the most significant act available to a person was simply to be seen choosing to do something, not to make a declaration of it, not to announce it, just to do it clearly in a room full of people who had decided not to. He saw Diane Holsworth from the Gala committee glance over from her conversation. He saw Marcus Brenly, near the bar, register the moment with a stillness that wasn't stillness at all, but a kind of rapid internal recalculation. He saw Patricia Lindqvist nod once, to no one in particular, in the way of someone confirming something they had already known. None of this was the point. The point was that Colette's shoulders had dropped a fraction, so small a change that no one else in the room would have caught it, and she was looking at him with an expression that was no longer managing anything. "You didn't have to do this," she said quietly. "I know," he said. "I mean, you didn't have to make it public. We could have stood at the edge and talked all night. We could have," he agreed, "but the edge gets smaller the longer you stay on it." She was quiet. The music moved through them both, slow and uncomplicated. "My daughter's name is Fern," she said after a while. He smiled, really smiled, not the social approximation of it. "Fern Arsenault. That's a serious name. She's a serious person, 8 going on 43. She paused. "She wanted me to come tonight. She said I needed to stop hiding in our house on Saturday evenings, which, for the record, I was not hiding. I was working. That sounds like hiding," Owen said, she admitted. "It does in retrospect. I have a son," he offered. "Declan, he's 34. He works in marine biology in Halifax and calls me every Sunday at 3 o'clock because Eleanor made him promise to, and he hasn't broken it in 7 years. A beat. He also thinks I hide in my office." "Do you?" "Frequently," he said, "though I prefer to call it consolidating." She laughed. A real one, the kind that arrives before a person decides whether to let it. It was not a sound he had heard from her before. It changed the whole arrangement of her face. The second dance came later, near the end of the evening, when the room had thinned and the remaining guests had settled into the looser configurations of people no longer tracking the current. The precision of the social choreography had slackened. People were simply being somewhere, rather than performing their presence. Between the two dances, a few things happened. Terence Aldous, a foundation board member Owen had known for 15 years, came over to say hello and ended up in a 20-minute conversation that drew in Colette naturally, without ceremony. He mentioned her impact report in a way that told Owen he had read it. He asked her a question about methodology that took the conversation somewhere substantive, and Owen stood slightly back and watched her answer with the particular precision of someone who had been waiting all evening to be asked something real. Diane Holsworth made a point of circling back to introduce herself to Colette with a warmth that had been conspicuously absent earlier. Owen noted it without comment. This was how rooms worked. The current could shift in both directions, and it shifted toward whoever was standing with whom. He was not naive about this. He had never been naive about the mechanics of these evenings, about what his presence beside someone communicated and what it corrected. He had lived long enough to understand that sometimes the most meaningful thing a person with standing could do was simply use it. Not loudly, not as a declaration, but as a quiet correction of an injustice so normalized that the people perpetuating it had stopped seeing it as injustice at all. Marcus Brenly did not come over. Owen didn't expect him to. What he noticed, near the end of the evening, was that Marcus had stopped watching them. He had turned fully toward his own group, and something in the angle of his shoulders suggested that whatever calculation he had been making, he had completed it and moved on to other things. That was, in Owen's experience, the best possible outcome. Not confrontation, not revelation, but simple irrelevance. The problem with quiet power was that it was invisible until it wasn't. The second dance was to something unhurried, something that invited no particular effort. "Can I ask you something?" Colette said. "You can. Why did you know who I was?" "Actually, no. The report, the work. Most people here know me as someone who used to work at Aldrich Policy and left under circumstances they have various theories about." Owen thought about how to answer this accurately. "I read everything the Foundation produces," he said. "I have for 30 years. Most of it is adequate. Some of it is good. Your report was different. It was written by someone who had actually talked to the people the programs were meant to serve, and who thought their experience was the point, not the data. She was quiet. Eleanor felt that way about the work, he continued. She used to get frustrated, and she was not easily frustrated, by impact assessments that treated children as metrics to be improved rather than people to be seen. Your report didn't do that. I didn't know it was being read at that level, Colette said. That's the thing about work done well, he said. You often don't know who's paying attention. She absorbed that. What happened at Aldrich, she said after a moment, not really a question, more like testing whether it was a thing that could be said out loud between them. You don't have to explain it, he said. I know I don't. She looked at the middle distance, somewhere above his shoulder. I flagged irregularities in how certain program funds were being tracked. Marcus preferred that I flag them to him privately, handle it internally, which in practice meant not handling it at all. I disagreed with his preferred approach. Loudly, eventually, and he had more institutional capital at the time, he did. She paused. He still does in certain rooms. Rooms have different radii, Owen said again. She looked at him directly. You keep saying that, because it keeps being true. She was quiet. Then he was going to make sure I didn't get the contract renewal here. That's why I wasn't. That's why tonight was. She stopped. I know, he said. I had a conversation with Patricia on Wednesday. She went still. About the renewal. About the Foundation's next research cycle. About the kind of work we want to commission, and the kind of people we want to commission it from. A pause. The contract was confirmed before you walked in tonight. She stared at him. He saw the moment she understood the full shape of it, not just what had been done, but what it meant, that the evening, the room, the careful management of her exclusion had already been undone before it began. That she had walked in here carrying weight that had already been lifted without her knowing. You could have told me that at the beginning of the evening, she said. I could have, he agreed. Why didn't you? He thought about it honestly, the way he tried to think about everything honestly. Because I wasn't entirely sure when I saw you come through that door that the contract was the only thing that needed correcting, he said. She didn't answer right away. The music continued its unhurried passage. Fern thinks I need to stop letting work be the whole thing, she said eventually. She phrased it differently. She said I needed to have a life outside of the laptop. She sounds perceptive. She is, unfortunately. Declan used almost the same phrasing, Owen said. Though in his case he said outside of the office and also outside of the house in general, Dad. And he was not wrong. The music moved toward its end. The room around them had settled into something quieter, less arranged. I should probably. Fern has a swimming lesson at 9 in the morning, Colette said. I told the sitter 10:30 at the latest. Of course. They stopped. She looked at him with an expression he wasn't sure how to name exactly. Gratitude, maybe, but layered over something more complicated. Something that was still sorting itself out. Thank you, she said. For this evening. For all of it. Thank you for the impact report, he said. The one you'll write next year will be even better. She almost rolled her eyes. That's a very specific thing to assume. I told you. I read everything. She collected her coat from the cloakroom and made her way toward the exit. Owen watched her go, the same green dress, the same careful walk, but different now in some quality he couldn't quite describe. Less contained, less arranged around an absence. He stayed for another 20 minutes, speaking briefly with Patricia, saying goodbye to a few board members whose work he respected and whose company he found, on good evenings, something approaching pleasant. When he finally left, the lobby was emptying. He pulled on his coat in the elevator, a habit Eleanor had always gently mocked, a preference for being ready to walk out into whatever waited, rather than pausing to prepare at the door. Outside, the October air off the Bow River had the particular sharpness it only finds after 9 in the evening, when the city has exhaled whatever warmth the day held and let the season back in. He walked to his car. He didn't rush. He thought about Fern Arsenault, 8 years old and already issuing directives about living outside the laptop. He thought about Declan, calling every Sunday at 3 o'clock from a research station in Halifax, keeping a promise to a woman who had made it easy to keep promises. He thought about Eleanor, and about the lily farm in Lacombe, and about the specific honesty of things that grow in a particular direction, simply because that is the direction they grow. He thought about what it cost, over time, to stand alone in a room that has arranged itself around your absence, and what it cost to simply walk across that room, not with fanfare, not with any announced intention, just with the quiet arithmetic of one person deciding that another person ought not to be invisible. The cost of that was almost nothing. The cost of not doing it accumulated differently. He drove home through streets that were slower now, emptier, the city settling into its own Saturday night. The foundation offices would be open Monday morning. There was work to do, real work, the kind that showed up in impact reports and literacy rates, and children learning that words were tools they were allowed to use. He was looking forward to it.